Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Energetic Principles in Herbal Medicine, the 33rd Annual American Herbalists Guild Symposium. And I am Mimi Hernandez, the Executive Director of the organization. And I'm really happy to welcome Kat Maier here with us today. And this is just a really adventurous sequence of events that we've had this weekend. How are you, Kat?
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to share this in a whole other format. It just is about the resiliency of herbalists. We were really shifting and changing. So I'm excited for this. And thank you, AHG, Michelle and Mimi, for taking time so that we can share this. Yeah.
Well, it was, I mean, you definitely displayed resilience Friday night in Bethesda, Maryland, where we were all so super engaged in your presentation, and you had this flow, and it was so beautiful. And then all of a sudden we had a fire alarm. Talk about peak energetics there. We had to evacuate the hall that we had the keynote speech in. And I remember just being out in the parking lot and us looking at each other like, what are we going to do? And then you just took the reins and started saying, I'm going to keep talking. And so we all gathered around you in the parking lot. It's something that we'll never forget. I just envision 10 years from now, people are going to say, where were you in 2020 in that parking lot? And I heard so many people mention how perfect it was that we were under the stars. I mean, I know in your presentation you refer to the stars and the cosmos. And so it's just almost felt like it was meant to be, like we were all involved in something really special with you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was an adventure, and it did really feel good to be outside, as much of a shift and change as it was. Yeah.
Well, that said, thank you, because we also had people, who were interrupted, especially the folks at home who had ordered the online symposium track. Their connection definitely was interrupted. And ever since then, they're like, what did she talk about? Is she going to do it again? When can we listen? And so that's why we're back together today, to make sure that everyone at home gets to listen to this really inspired and important message. And by the way, those of you who are interested, we still have the online track available. Just go to the American Herbalists Guild website on the symposium homepage, and you can order those recordings, or you can just write to the office at americanherbalistguild.com and order your recordings of the symposium online track. But without further ado, I just want to welcome Kat today and remind everyone that her book, Energetic Herbalism, A Guide to Sacred Plant Traditions, Integrating Elements of Vitalism, Ayurveda, and Chinese Medicine, is out, and it's been winning awards, and it's definitely a real important tome to carry in your herbal libraries. So do look for that book, and more, just so much inspirational gifts of message in this book. And we're just looking forward to hearing your speech all in one uninterrupted.
Well, you never know. We've got some major energies out there, but yeah, I just really hope people can settle down, get a cup of tea, and we'll spend some time together. But thank you, Mimi.
Nice. Okay, well, I'm going to let you take it away, and we'll go from there. Thanks, everyone, and have a great time listening to Kat.
All right. Thank you, Mimi.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's such a treat coming to you from my school here in Charlottesville, Virginia, and so grateful again for AHG. When I started the keynote, when I was there, I just want to share this because it's so true about our community. I pulled into the parking lot, and there I saw a group of adults down on the ground looking really closely, and I looked further, and there was a loop at one of their eyes, and I walked over, and of course it was folks geeking out about the species of bitins that's dwelling on the edge of a parking lot in Bethesda, Maryland. And you just realize, oh my goodness, I have missed my community so much. We're so curious and so engaged. So again, it's an honor to be here, and thank you, AHG. I love this time of year. I was raised by Irish Catholic matriarch, and All Souls Day and All Saints Day was a really important feast day, actually. We pray for the poor souls in purgatory. I think that might be a Catholic bardo, if you will, a little longer. But it was very important, and we had our relatives, and we had the icons of that tradition. And so years later, I'm raising my family, and we're doing the same thing. And this is 20, 30 years later. That we're coming in and really honoring ancestors, because when we're looking at energetic herbalism and patterns, we're realizing as genomics and biometrics and epigenetics comes into our lives, we're realizing these are patterns. These are the energies that we'll be working with. And so, having a halamus, the altar was a little different. There were flowers, there were other objects, there were many herbs to burn, and there would be my 5-year-old son kind of bucking with his full regalia of Halloween costume, wanting to get out for the forbidden fruit of Halloween that never was in the house. But it was years later when he would come up to me and said, Mom, I kind of get what you were saying. I learned about Day of the Dead. And then we were studying traditions in Korea. And at the same time of year, there are these honorings of ancestors. And so what I think is important for us to remember as earth-centered practitioners is we are not doing these ceremonies. These ceremonies are languaging the energy and the cosmology of the time through us. And so if at this time of year, all around the planet, there is this ancestral honoring and prayers and paying homage, that's so much beyond our cultures and costumes. We're really listening. And so I also want to honor the ancestors of our own community that passed this year. Recently, Jim Duke, Stephen Foster, Michael Phillips, maybe any of your teachers or beloved that may have left because of coronavirus. I'm just really honoring those energetics. One of my favorite lectures of Stephen Foster, well, there were two actually, one at UPS Botanical Sanctuary for their 25th celebration a couple of years ago. And then the second, he paid homage to Jim, and he's such an archivist and a photographer and a great storyteller. But then the other was, and this is on the AHG archives, when Stephen gave a history of herbal medicine at AHG, I think it was a Georgia conference a number of years ago. Absolutely brilliant. So I really send you to look that up and, find that date, because I've never heard our stories in very different ways told with such amusement, elegance, articulation, and great honoring. And so we're also really learning to pay homage to the folks in First Nations that have lived on the land, the unceded territory. And so when I was in Bethesda, there's this great website called Native Lands Digital. And anywhere in the world, you put in your address and they'll come up with the native peoples of that area. It's a work in progress, it's collaborative, but more than a performative act of just naming names. They'll take you to the website and you'll see how vital, the history of them, how to engage. And so in my area here in Charlottesville, it's the Monacan Nation, who are very active. In Bethesda, it's the Piscataway, who are also a thriving community, as well as the Nakulchank. And the Nakulchank were further south, and they were reveled for being amazing navigators and traders. They had the James River, the Anacostia River, they had the East Coast. So for thousands of years, they would really engage in the trading and bringing different goods back and forth in communication. And so the Nakulchank, the Westerners did not like the guttural pronunciation, and there are different pronunciations. So they Latinized and they put an A in front of it. And so it became Anacostan, and then Anacostia, and then They named the Anacostia River and then the Anacostia neighborhood of Washington. It's such a vital neighborhood. So looking at ancestors, when we're looking at medicine of place and the energetics of who was here, what were the plants, all of these energetics are harvested in the plants that we gather. And so I want to go back further before our human species was here and go back to plants. And finally, we're at a time when, scientists and botanists and poets and writers were all coming together and saying, yes, these plants are our kin. And these are our relations. These are from whence we cometh. One scientist calls it our green lineage 1.8 billion years ago. And there's another number of 500 million years ago when the algae migrated and colonized the land with a collaborative effort to the mycelial kingdom. And depending on the metrics, depending on the science, somewhere between those millions and millions of years ago, it is said that consciousness was seeded because it was the beginning of plants' self-awareness. They became aware of self, and that's consciousness. And today that's called kin recognition, and that's translated in many different ways. But when we look to science, when we're looking at how do we apply it to our medicines or our livelihoods, it's they took a sea rocket, the lovely sea rocket plant that we see along the coastline and the dunes. They did a study with the sea rocket. It's edible, nice and spicy and pungent. And so what they did was they planted one single plant by itself, and then they took the species and they planted it in a grouping of just that species. And then they planted it with other species. And so what they did with their measurement, they realized that the single plant, grew and did everything it needed to do to sustain that one plant. When it was with its family, the same species, the roots held back, the aggressiveness, if you will, of the root really held back because they wanted all the other plants. They wanted the grouping to proliferate so that all the energy would go into the seed, into the flowering, into the proliferation of the species. And then with that third grouping with other species, it kind of went back to its own nature of tending itself. And so the word altruism has been given to this characteristic, this nature, where they're giving up of themselves for the greater good of the whole. They did another incredible experiment, maybe your pantry, my pantry aren't really seeing the effects of the food shortage yet, but it's here. It's not that this time is coming, it is here. And so there's some very progressive agronomists and scientists and permaculturists that are starting to figure out, what are we going to do? How are we going to work with this crisis of ours? And so there was this one study that they did of sunflowers, looking at plant oil, and commercial sunflowers are bred for a super, super strong stalk so that they're not bent or they're not blowing over. And so what these farmers did was they took a more native species of the sunflowers, and they planted them much more densely than they would in a commercial operation. And what they observed was with this more native species, when the seed heads came on, there was this movement. Each sunflower would move a little bit to the side so that the sunflower behind it would have more sun. Kin recognition, a pattern of growth. This is energetics. When they harvested those, they found out that the oil production was 47% greater than another commercial way of planting. So we're in this transition time. We're face to face with serious, serious challenges. And oftentimes we think, we need more technology, more fertilizers, more products, more things. and watching nature and giving nature her agency. There is so much already happening within the systems of our biosphere that are already adapting, that are already giving us, you know, so much technology, you know, from these plants. So with the sunflowers in the sun, I want to go back one more step and don my Carl Sagan cape. As I said the other night, and I think there must have been a lot. If you don't know who Carl Sagan is, we're kind of dating ourselves in generations, but brilliant Cornell astrophysicist and scientist, and had amazing programs that took us into the reality of the cosmos. Anyway, so going back about 13 billion years, right after the Big Bang, what happened was there were these stars, and these stars or suns were 50, 60, 70 times greater than our sun. And with this intense heat and size, something called nucleosynthesis took place and still takes place. And so you might start with hydrogen, but what happened in these alchemical cauldrons of creation is all the trace elements were formed. And so I don't know if you remember from high school that trace element chart that you were praying that you would never be asked to memorize, right? But boron, chromium, magnesium, all the trace elements are created in these stars. And so when the stars would lose mass, they would sweep out, they become a supernova, and there would be this sweeping action, and they would then seed neighboring systems, neighboring stars, neighboring galaxies. And then this would go on again for another billion years, 500 million years. You know, I love this little factoid. 1 million, a million seconds is 11 days. A billion seconds is 30 years. So when we're talking about evolution, when we're talking about the sustenance of species in the planet, a billion is it's inconceivable. We almost need imagination, you know, to conceive of that. So with these billions of years of creation, what would happen is then these elements would then form chains, and they would make species of gases, and over time asteroids, and then planets, and then one fine day on planet Earth billions of years ago, you know, there was that perfect moment when two hydrogens would meet with an oxygen, and here's water, and then here's life. And so everything is made of stardust. Everything comes from such a long time ago. You know, a famous physicist said, you know, the cells in your right hand can be from 200 million years, and the cells in your left hand can be from a whole other time. So Rumi says we're stars wrapped in skin. Joni Mitchell, this may be a little projection, but she couldn't go to Woodstock. She had a previous engagement, and so she's watching, you know, this whole movement. And, you know, she gifted us that incredible song. We are stardust, we are golden. We are billion-year-old carbon, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. And so in the garden, we bring all of our cells and all of our memories, and that's where we as herbalists really thrive. This is where we meet, this is where we join, this is what turns us on. And so as herbalists, what we're doing is we're tending the soul of the soil, whether it's biodynamics, mycelial compost, our prayers, our love, our children, our placentas, our birthing, you know, whatever that is, we are bringing that soul of our species into the soil. When we're working with our clients in community, you know, we're helping to bring the soil into the souls of our community, because we're working with ecology, right? It's all about terrain. Energetic herbalism is about tending the terrain, just nudging the vital force to do what it needs to do. And sometimes we need allopathies, many times we do. But in energetic herbalism or energetic medicine, we have deep, deep faith, right? We have deep faith in our own ability to come to that functioning place. And so when we're looking at that and that ecology, it's how do we welcome people home? And so many of you are physicians and nurse practitioners and counselors and acupuncturists. So when I refer to herbalists, if you're working with plants in your materia medica, I'm referring to you. It doesn't matter. And so my training was as a physician assistant. I didn't want the full Monty of medical school because I knew the plants would take up, the rest of my life. But I wanted that scientific language in some ways to translate and to have this other understanding. And so the school thing, I couldn't work for me. I couldn't find that connection didn't happen. And what happened was myself, along with so many other colleagues 30 years ago, we went into the fields, we went into the forests, we literally apprenticed to the plants. There was nothing online. There was no other option. We had books, we had eclectics, we had Jethro cloths, we had Maud Greaves, and then our community began to flourish. And so in that apprenticeship, I'd spent years. I had the honor of having the Shenandoah National Park as my neighbor. And so for a number of years, I would go in with my loop and my books and, work in the morning and head into the forest. And so one July day, I'm heading in because there was this huge stand of black cohosh, Acteo racemosa, that I knew was going to be in full bloom. And racemosa is the raceme flower. And so I knew they'd be in full bloom. And if you've ever seen a huge stand, it's a sight to behold. So, I'm on the trail and it was quite a ways away, and I'm looking on the ground like most herbalists. We're kind of looking out who's there. And so I'm turning this corner and I feel this compelling energy coming towards me. And long, long, long down the trail, I felt this black cohosh. And I felt this energy emitting from this cohosh coming into me, and it literally took my breath away. There were no entheogens here. There was no other plant helpers, plant things that were, making my liminal consciousness. So this was my endocrine system that was having this experience, my heart. And so there became this exchange, and I just held it as long as I could. And, I had to move quickly and get out of, is this really happening? Because there was information. And I know so many of you have had this experience, whether it's a rock or a river or an ocean. There's this exchange, there's this kin recognition. And so it was too far away for me to really smell it, but I was getting that fetid scent. The raceme flowers, it's pollinated by flies. And so to attract flies, you want to have that fetid, pungent smell. I could smell that. I could taste the biota that the plant was growing in. It was acrid. Cohosh is acrid. I'm like, wow, is the soil acrid? Is it cohosh? But there was this download, if you will, of all of this information. And so, I just let as much happen as could be. And when it finished, I just kind of fall to my knees and had this profound emotional experience. And in the days afterwards, in processing this, two main things came forward. One is, as growing up without herb school, without, traditions or parents or grannies, I always thought in order to be an herbalist, I need a shaman or a curandera, or I need a life-threatening disease in order for me to be a healer. And I always thought I need this incredible initiation. Well, I realized that cohosh was my initiation, and I will never, ever need another one. This was nature. This was the initiation. This was that amount of energy to say, yes, you've been coming, you've been showing up, you've been visiting and sitting with us and harvesting us. We give you this. And then the other thing is, I realized that it was kind of hard to tell my partner at the time, but that experience touched me in places I had no idea existed in my body. And that experience brought love into places that I had no idea could be loved like that. It was very, very different. And so we have our patterns of humans, and we learn, and we have these certain ways. But the kaleidoscopic beauty and power and medicine of these plants is beyond anything we could ever imagine, right? You know this. And so that was when I realized, wow, plants teach us how to become human. That day, that plant, that kohash made me even more human. It opened up places in me. And now I have this belief in this relationship. And so there's those experiences that I know you all have shared as well. And then in some ways, the more mundane, but still miraculous, you can have capsules. Say, for example, we have freeze-dried nettles, or just nettle capsules. And if my clients only want to take capsules, so be it. I'm not attached. Let's just get you the best quality. Of course, I am attached in many ways to teas. And so what happens is when we drink that nettles infusion, we take that first sip, and the aroma, we're transported to the ocean, because for me, nettles is land seaweed, right? I mean, that salt, those minerals. And so we take that first sip, and that symphony goes off. It's like lighting us up and, really bringing energy in a very different way. And then we're like, oh, I know you. I recognize you. Your blood has magnesium in the heme ring, and I have iron, and your blood will nourish my blood. That chlorophyll will really nourish me. Oh, I know your amino acids, the protein. There's very simple. You're not going to make my body work for proteins. It's accessible. It's easy to bring in the amino acids of nettles to make hormones, to make tissues. We have co-evolved with these plants. There's this familiarity. Oh, and of course, that kidney, you're going to go to my kidney. I feel you nourishing and moving my kidney. Chinese will put a pinch of salt in it. Formula sometimes to direct medicine to the kidney. And so we have these constituents, we have these spirit. People say, oh, do you do spirit medicine or scientific, biochemical? And there is no difference, right? Jim Duke, he was, these constituents are the spirit language. The spirit has many, many different languages. And the brilliance of science coming in and articulating that. And look at our polyphenols. This miraculous group of foods and herbs, our flavonoids. They've been trying to study quercetin during Corona, just because they realized, look at this anti-inflammatory action. Look at these antioxidants in all of the medicine. And the bioavailability is a bit of a challenge, so we have to keep going back to our plants, right? And the plants we go back to, and this is where we shine and reign, these are the unhybridized weeds. We have hybridization, and have you ever seen those like 3-headed echinaceas that are orange? It's like, oh my God, that looks like the Lorax. They're so bizarre. Give them a couple of years though, and hybrids will kind of come back to their original being and be like, God, I'm glad I only have one head now. This feels so much better. But our bodies are hungry for these nutrients, because for the 50, 60,000 years before the last maybe 400 or 500, we've had polyphenols. It's only been these constituents that have been nourishing and tending us, so that when we take these in, our body misses them. These aren't new, aronia berry or, acai berry, all these hotty toddy, brand new. These are old. Our body is hungry for these. And so that's plant energetics. That is also a pattern, because that pattern of the constituent, what that does is, it's genetic expression. We can have genetic expression for methylation or some negation of life, but it's also, we bring in these nutrients and it signals mRNA and proteins, and the protein has this whole cascade. And then that goes to the arterial wall, and it's like, okay, calm down. You don't have to be inflamed. You can be cool. And there are antioxidants. They're the plants that just really, as Mimi Hernandez beautifully says, we quench our bodies with these because they're so needed, especially at this time. And so maybe one lifetime I'll come back and incarnate as a Chinese herbalist, but I look at their patterns and in their formulas, and they're so complicated, and all the players and the officials and the all the different roles. That's a pattern. They bring all of those plants together to create one action. My teacher is Karen Sanders, and she and her wife Sarah Holmes, we did a deep apprenticeship, and in that they taught us, you'll see this beautiful picture of Solomon seal. We just harvested this Solomon seal last week, and because it's on the endangered list, so anything that's on the at-risk endangered list, plant it. So you can have it in your apothecary so that you can give away. These, golden seal is so easy to grow, we give it away here. So we were harvesting because it was just getting too crowded. But what her teaching is that when you see Solomon seal root, right, it's a 90-degree angle. And this Solomon seal helps make change, makes right angle changes. And it's able to do that. And if you get an older root, you'll just see this movement, this succession of right angle roots. And so change is very hard for us. So when we take drop doses of the pattern of making a change, when it's time to make that change, it's easier. That's been bushwhacked. That's another way of working with patterns. And then, when you don't go to herbal school yet, you're always putting out these, well, I've got to do this in order to be an herbalist, and now I have to do that, which is why we're all starting schools, because it took us a long time to craft and cobble and really gather many wisdoms. But so when I first met William Lasassier, I thought, oh my goodness, no wonder he's the teacher's teacher. And he has this triune formula that's said to have come to him in a dream. And it's this incredible way of formulating. And so I thought, all right, this is the next pinnacle. This is what I'm going to learn. And God loves the students in the clinic that year, because that's what we did. And I couldn't have done it without David Winston's book about how to apply the different herbs. And so it was frustrating, and it was hard, and it wasn't fun, and it just took a lot of work. But we were at it, we were working at it, and we learned our materia medica. It was an amazing way to look at materia medica in a different light. But then we'd finally get it done, and it'd be like we're standing on the brink of the Grand Canyon. It was astonishing. We never could have come up. So between the divine inspiration of William and, the materia medica brilliance of David, coming up with these formulas. So that's the beauty of our profession, right? It doesn't matter whether it's a drop dose, whether you're sitting with a plant, whether it's flower essence, whether it's complicated Chinese formulas. What matters is that we invite all ways to be present in our community. We don't go through the archetype that's happening right now. I mean, division is the archetype of this time. And so every area is, feeling that stress. And so we're coming back together. And so how do we make the moves as a community to come back together and support each other's differences? And so the one thing is, what's so phenomenal is we're a pattern-loving species. And we're a pattern-loving species because that's the world we live in. The world we live in is made of fractals. And so here is an image of a fractal. A fractal is nature. And what a fractal is, it's a self-replicating form. And it can go on infinitum, or it can go on within an aloe plant, can go on in a cauliflower and a sunflower seed. I have a friend who's a flower farmer, and she goes up to customers and says, look at this flower, it's a fractal. Fractals make you feel good. See, it's not a zinnia. But fractals are that self-replicating form. And they're in nature because they're efficient. It's a way of gathering sunlight, it's a way of transporting nutrients or water or different ways of reproduction. And it's been happening since the beginning of time because it is the galaxy, our brain cell, the galaxy cell, all of it is a fractal. And so we may think it's Terence McKenna or Garcia who brought us the word fractal. It was actually Benoit Mandelbrot. And so this next fractal image is actually, he was a brilliant Polish mathematician, Polish-American mathematician, and he was enamored with the chaos theory. So if you see this one slide of this fractal, this cosmic form, that is a mathematical equation. And then when you see the next slide of that other form, that's a very, very famous form, that round form and the extension coming off. You know, if you Google him and go onto YouTube, you will get lost. It'll be a mesmerizing journey because it's infinity. And so what he was really interested in, he said, yes, these beautiful shapes are very impactful. And what he was interested in was what he called the rough fractals. So that's clouds and mountains and coastlines. These are all fractals. And his famous saying is, clouds are not spheres, mountains are not cones, coastlines are not circles, lightning does not strike in a line, and bark is not smooth. And so he was bringing in these chaotic seeming forms, but they're also fractals. So when we gaze at a mountain vista, yes, it's this magnificent, it's earth, it's all things that are stirred, but what's happening is through our lens, there's a physiologic resonance that makes us feel good. And it's a stimulation of this alpha frequency, and it goes to the front part of our brain, and it's a lot like wide angle vision. You know, wide angle vision, we drop down into parasympathetic, yet we come online and we focus. They make us feel good. I had a great conversation with Guido Massé, and he said, you know, we parse the universe. You know, that's how we take things in, and that's how we've evolved. And this is why nature and looking at clouds, you know, what a profound, immense recognition of love. I mean, the whole fact that we're born from stars. You know, the scientists, I'm going to step back just for a minute and go back and say, you know, the scientists call that reseeding galactic chemical evolution. And what's so funny is when I said the word galactic chemical evolution, that's when the fire drill went off. So maybe that's why I might have left it all out. But what I want to say is you can have these names for, but that's love, right? That's creator loving us, you know, taking millions of years to make our nails and our hair and our organs, and that we share that stardust. And so the fact that we walk outside and look at clouds and look at mountains and can have our endocrine systems and our neurological systems relax and get down into parasympathetic, that's love. That's whatever, however you language creator, creation, Allah, God, that's how much we are loved. And it's pretty astounding. And so what we're looking at is there's also an application of the fractals. There's something called attention restoration theory. And it's coming from, you know, less and less ability to concentrate. We're seeing learning disabilities on the rise. And it's also this It's like, oh my goodness, look, they're in Bali. Oh, now they're in Barcelona. Oh, how do they have time? How do they have money to travel? Oh, look at their apothecary. Look at their TikTok. Oh, I'm not a very good herbalist. My social media, it's just very, oh, I'm confused. So we go on and it's isolating. And if this tool were, that's such a great idea, I'm going to call them. I'm going to find out how did they do that. If it was collaborative, it would bring on focus. And so these, Benoit was talking about, its form and function and timing. And so he was looking at timing, and it's so interesting. He said, the heartbeat, we wanted normal sinus rhythm, and we want this normality to it. But he said, if you really look closely at it, it's ever so slightly skewed. And it's this beat that is slightly off, because he said, if day after day, decade after decade, you would have the same heartbeat, that would be wear and tear on the vessels. So that's nature. You'll see in this slide the branching of the cardiovascular. That's a branching, that's a form of fractals. That's what our body does. That's what the plants are doing when we take them in. The bizarro facts, there's 93,000 miles of blood vessel, even the microcirculation. 93,000 miles in our body. And so why nature evolved billions of years and came up with fractals is what happens is you have this almost infinite perimeter. It's kind of like a snowflake, right? Perimeter is extended, infinite, but the area is limiting. So in this body, even say it's 30,000 miles. That's even bizarre. Blood vessels from here to California, like how does that happen? That's fractals. That's that branching. And when we look at the next slide and we look at our lungs and we see that branching of the bronchi and the alveoli, that's creating more space. And so it's said that if you lay out all the lung tissue, it's the size of a tennis court. And that's huge, right? That's the amount of oxygen we need. But how do you put that in this very small area? And so that's what these fractals are. And so we're looking at the timing and nature and going back once again to the tools. They did studies in Boston Biomedical Research, and it's a subset of Boston University, but in 2020, they did this research of looking at COPD and emphysema, and they were tracking the progression, and they were realizing it's following a fractal pattern. So if we can go in and understand where is it moving, how can we get, the herbs or the medicine, or how can we go in and prevent progression? Because it's following nature's path. We look at rivers and flows and all of that. And so when we look at the timing, that also is such an important part of healing, of medicine. And so when we look at energetic herbalism, a lot of times we naturally think of elements, the wood, the metal. When I was learning many, many years ago, I had the opportunity to meet a master of 5-phase teachings, 5-element, 5-phase theory. And I know in the Chinese community, you have classical Chinese and you have 8 principle and Taoist, and there's all kinds of conversation. And, 5 phases thought, well, it's too superficial maybe, or psychological. But when I learned 5 phase, one, it was just, the tool that was given to me, and it had such a deep resonance. And so this whole weekend, or there's going to be recordings, the weekend that happened, there were all these classes on 5 system, 5 elements. So I'm not going to do a deep dive into each of those elements. But what I do want to do is I want to make these patterns and this energetic language meaningful, because I think the only conversation we need to be having is climate change. This is all around us. This is our world. This is our world as humans. This is our world as healers, as community activists, as ecologists. And so when I learned 5 phase, again, which is the same as element, I like the word phase because it's phases of our life. It's changing. It's constantly changing. There's never, black or white in nature. It's constantly evolving and morphing and adjusting to that moment in time. And so when I learned it, I thought, oh my gosh, this is that missing piece, the vitalism. It's the seasons. It's that deep dive into each of the elements. And I felt like they were instruction manuals. Here's the spring, here's the food, here's the activities. And it was so intuitive, and it was a way that I could work with my clients that would make sense for them. Here's a pattern. This isn't a diet. It's not a keto. It's not this. It's not that. This is nature. We are patterned into nature to have different foods, different activities at different times of the year. We're not 365 all the same. And so I want to begin in the spring, and that's birth. That's growth, that's development, and the element of that is wood. That's that incredible tree. That's, that dandelion growing up in the sidewalk, if it's in DC, if it's in New York, wherever, these plants are going to grow. Nothing is going to stop it. That's that birthing energy. We talk about liver heat rising, and the organ system in 5 phase. You have seasons, emotions, patterns, and you have what's called officials. I won't get into it now, but officials are energetic representations. But for this homeopathic dose of 5 phase, we'll just refer to them as the organ systems, but they really are officials, but many of the similar properties. And so the emotion that's processed in with wood, with development and growth, is anger. And anger is a very important energetic. And so there's a thing in Chinese medicine that you want to be a free and easy wanderer, because liver governs flow, and you want to have the gall of a military leader, because when you need to defend yourself, when you are under violation, you need to project an energy that will protect you or your loved ones. That's anger. That's what that is. And so for me, the greatest teacher in climate change of this time is Standing Rock. Standing Rock still exists because it's in us. This is a movement that all of us participated in. We're stardust. If you sent medicines, if you sent prayers, even just being alive at this time of Standing Rock, you participated in one of the most successful expressions of anger. It was indigenous led. It was finally, the world is looking at indigenous people with the honor and the light and the reverence that is so deserving. And so in this protest, in this place of, laying their bodies in front of the rubber bullets and the tear gas and the incredible assaults, that came to them, they protested, they held strong. And that ease and flow really came from the prayer. You walked onto that camp. It was incredible how you'd be outside, you'd walk into that camp, and there was such an infusion. It was something I've never, ever experienced before. It was prayer. Every morning at dawn, the elder women would go down to the river and sing the prayers and honor water as life. And the lodges were happening, and the smoke was burning, and it was full of prayer in order to help balance that anger. So as we're going forward in this time, we really want to let that anger move through, but it's so uncomfortable. And so we move that through with our prayer. And so moving into summer, the summer is the element of fire. And fire is that heart. And Chinese have this beautiful way. They have these 3 officials that protect the heart. They feel the heart is the emperor. And so that queen, king, kin, them, they, that supreme heart needs a lot of protection. And so they have heart protector and pericardium, and it's kind of complicated, but the message is, how do we protect our heart? And what we do now is sometimes there's this feeling, oh, I have to see the devastation. I have to watch Ukraine. I have to see these storms. I have to see these images. Would you bring your child in? Would you say, oh, my 3-year-old son, come look at these images? You have to see these in order to develop compassion? Absolutely not. So our heart is our child. And where do we take our heart and how do we protect our heart? So as herbalists and healers, that's a task ahead of us, helping people discern the small intestine separates pure from impure. Helping people engage what activity. We don't have to be there to know. The other thing with fire, where our role really comes in, is they did this 2 years ago. Environmentalists and climate activists did this study. They went to Portland and they went to Richmond. But actually, the study originated in Richmond, but they looked at climate deaths and mortality. And summer mortality these last 2 years has been from climate change. It isn't violence. We see violence rise in the heat, right? But it's been from climate change. And so they looked at areas that were redlined, urban areas that had redline districting. And this was a heinous practice that was about districting different urban topography as far as where do we invest, what neighborhoods do we invest in. So the marginalized, the lower income, the fringe neighborhoods, they were redlined. And these neighborhoods is where the highest mortality was. And it was because there were no trees. You're not going to invest parks. You're not going to invest neighborhoods with lots of trees. And so we have that place of planting the trees. It can be that simple in many ways, but this is being proven. And then the other thing is we have our refrigerants. We have our hibiscus, we have our cooling herbs, looking at elders. How do we get ahead? Early summer, starting to cool their high blood pressure, starting to cool their systems, and looking at the elements, energetic patterns. So we're leaving the summer and we're going into late summer, and late summer is Lunasa. And Lunasa is August 1st. In Chinese medicine, it's the earth element. This is abundance. This is when you don't want to see one more zucchini. Even if you're zoodling away, you're done. You don't want any more. So for the fortunate, this is that abundant earth time. The flavor is sweet. Oh, the other thing I want to say about the summer, that a lot of times herbalists think bitter is liver, but in Chinese medicine, bitter flavor nourishes the heart and the fire. And how beautiful is that, right? Because bitters are cooling and bitters have a downward direction. You can moisten, you can warm them up, you can have angelica, but generally your motherworts and vervains and our beloved bitters are cooling and they have a downward direction. So bitters are really important for that heat of summer. So coming into late summer, that's the elements of earth and its stomach and spleen. And what's really profound about this is the emotion is sympathy or empathy. A lot of times I hear overwhelm. When I hear the word overwhelm, it's earth out of balance. And Kat Maier is a San Francisco physician, activist, amazing woman. She wrote a book with Raj Patel, Inflamed, Deep Medicine and Social Justice. And they were looking at the comorbidity factors from Corona. And, one of the things that happened is, many people say, oh, well, with low income or different folks, the comorbidity, lots of diabetes, lots of hypertension, why don't these people eat better? Why don't these populations exercise more? And, what we know for earth out of balance, these comorbidity factors, there is no herb, there is no exercise for white supremacy, for oppression, for racism, for genocide. This is that epigenetic, what's being laid down. They did a biopsy of Martin Luther King's heart, and they said he had the heart of a 60-year-old. And they thought, oh, it must have been his stress. He might have been born with the heart of a 30-year-old. This is epigenetic trauma. And so we look at these comorbidity factors. This is Earth. You know, how do we help our community deal with the overwhelm of so many injustices? And so how do we help their life be sweet? And how do we help them regulate that imbalance and that bitterness and that sweetness? And we have so many incredible herbs to do that. Enzymes, you know, how do I stomach this? We digest much more than our food. We had to digest all of these injustices. And that will take a long time, and it takes a tremendous amount of humility for those in privileged positions. And so we're moving from the late summer and, you know, doing that deep activism work and going into fall. And fall is, you know, again, this time of year, we're entering the kind of close. No, we got a good amount actually. So in fall, the organs are lungs and large intestine, and the element is metal. And the metal element needs to stay shiny. And we keep it shiny by the cleansing action of these two systems, you know, officials or organs. Every breath is a detox. Every bowel movement, we're releasing and re-nourishing and keeping things moving. And so the flavor here is pungent. And that pungent is so important because why you cleanse at this time is you don't want to go into the cold, damp months of winter with phlegm. You want to clear that. And so the emotion that's processed here is grief. And so, you know, when I talk about Standing Rock, I really want to honor, I feel like the invitation to go was from Spirit, and it's an awful lot like an entheogenic journey. It's like I don't wake up and say, oh, I think I'll do ayahuasca today. You know, I have an invitation, which is why I've only had one invitation. I'm still waiting, but you know, the same thing happened. You know, this was a native-led journey. And yes, a lot of herbalists went and helped and were called, and it was fabulous. But for me personally, you know, it wasn't, I'm going to go on my Thanksgiving break. This is their sacred ceremony. It was a ceremony. So, you know, one day, you know, late November, you know, I had a dream. It was very clear, and I arrive in December, and, you know, we're there a couple of days, and we had to evacuate because this historic storm came through. And who was left at this point? They were elders. And these elders were amazing. They were in teepees and they were tended, but it was this blizzard. So we had to evacuate and take folks up to the casino. And in the casino, every single bathroom in the casino has a container for a hypodermic needle. That's diabetes. That's the epidemic of the epigenetic earth out of balance. And so you have this situation. And so actually it was Rupta who wrote that amazing book. She was a physician, you know, heading up and really holding space for a medical clinic at Standing Rock. So when we evacuated, we triaged. We had a place in the casino for allopathy, and then the herbalist set up next door and kind of moving back and forth. What we were seeing is herbalists had more than we had. I mean, it's not an us or a them. I'm straddling all of it, and all of it's important. You know, we needed some of the insulin. We needed so many of those medications. But what we had was the fire cider that herbalists from all over the country sent. We had a whole bar. We had the sweet pomegranate up to the XXX habanero, cayenne, apple cider, or fire cider vinegar, because they were cold to the bone. It was damp, it was dank. We wanted to prevent pneumonia. So they'd come up, they'd get a shot, they'd go away, they'd rest. And then they'd come and get more, and maybe it'd be less. But it was this immediacy of our medicine. It's that pungent, it's going through. This is, you know, generations of grief that we were looking at. And so when I teach the lungs and grief in classes, so many times that elder folk will come up and they'll say, wow, I had the worst case of pneumonia after my partner, my husband of 50 years died. And my father taught me that. My father, Hank Maier, is beloved, beloved man. Children loved him. My friends loved him. Everybody loved Hank. He was incredibly healthy, safe for his Alzheimer's. So we brought him down to live here, and you know, he was appreciative. He lived with my sister for quite a while, and then he came down to live with me. And he said, I love you, but I don't want to be babysat. I want to hang around with people my own age. So we found him a nice place, and life was good. He was super well groomed and charming, and he was one of a few men, mostly women were there. So he was living the good life until he wasn't. When his disease progressed, he had to move to another part of the facility. And so for 6 months, he sang the same song, show me the way to go home. I'm tired and I want to go to bed. He was finished, he knew. And so he had this really, really challenged life at that time. And I had breakfast with him every morning and would go in every night. So one day I go in and he was still in bed. We take him to the hospital and he had pneumonia. And so we get him up, settle him in a room, and I talked to this young physician. I said, I know this is going to sound very odd, but do we really have to treat him? And his eyes welled up with tears. And he said, Kathleen, if more people really understood that pneumonia is old man's friend. He said, this is what I did with my grandmother. She, like your father, was 86. She didn't have Alzheimer's, but it was a complete life. And so our body wisdom, we have these ways, you know, if you have pneumonia and that isn't your time, obviously treat and treat deep and treat well. But my father had the most miraculous passing. He fell asleep. And so they came in, the nurses came in, and, you know, he was still loved in his passing moments. And they said, oh, well, let's give him morphine. And I said, well, he's not in pain, is he? And they said, no, but that rattle is kind of disconcerting to you. And I said, no, thank you very much. That's fine. Because if my father is about to have his first and only DMT, dimethyltryptamine experience, I am not going to suppress it with morphine or painkillers if he is not in pain. And so that was this magnificent teaching, you know, this place of how do we pass, how do we hold space. And so with this grieving, the last thing I want to say is I read Stephen Buhner's book, Earth Grief, and I think this might be one of his most brilliant gifts to our community. It's a profound book. And my native teachers have said, before you do anything with earth activism or climate change, we have to grieve. You have to grieve before you go in and engage in certain ways. And so his book really articulated so many points, but this is what I did, you know, for that amount of time. It was almost like this permission to say, yeah, I don't think we're going to make it. And that's not what he's saying, but he's laying out incredible stories. And he's, you know, revealing how so much of the discussion of climate change is intellectual, where this is us, this is our life, this is the nature. And so for a couple of months, 2, 3, 4 months, I was like, yeah, we're not going to make it. You know, Roe v. Wade happened, and of course the streets, and there's, you know, incredible response, as it should be. But on Friday of that week, what people did not notice was the dismantling of the EPA when it comes to industrial pollution. My hybrid car is not going to get us through this. It's the big picture. And so what happened was, what nobody's hitting the street was this profound major blow happened to Mother Earth. The big polluters were just given carte blanche. So the numbers aren't getting better. Doesn't seem like we're going in any direction. And one of the things that happened is when I accepted, I had this incredible relief, and I realized how much unconscious energy I've been putting towards, we're going to make it. We have to make it. Our children's children. Yes, we have to make it. Well, what if we don't? But also what happened was I began to engage with my garden, with my friends, with my family, with my beloveds in such a tender, tender way. So then it even made me more inspired, more heartened, and it brought me through, and I'm free of the hope that keeps us in the future. Hope's a funny thing. So looking at that grief, I think is really, really important, because as healers, this is what folks are coming in with. It's not going to be on their intake form. We're going to be seeing colitis, ulcerative Crohn. We're going to see a lot of different things, but underneath in the background is always going to be what's going to happen. So working with that and our nervines and lung clear and all of that is very important. So that's kind of exhausting, right? And then you're coming into Halamis and it's, ancestor time. And then we're gifted another great act of love. We're gifted winter. We're given that time of rest. And the element here is water, and this is kidney and bladder. And the element or the emotion that's processed here is fear. So fear is life. Fear is life-saving. It's life-giving. I need a certain amount of fear so I can, have my navigation skills in what's happening. And then there's that overabundance of fear that we're experiencing these days. And so there's no adaptogen in the world that's going to replace that laying down and that resting. And, the kidneys are essence. It's ancestral chi. It's, coming to life. It's our life essence. And so we really need to rest, and that's a privilege. That's a privilege. And so for those that don't have that privilege, how can we step in and how can we work with our plants and our foods to help people rest for that season? Or how do we walk in? And what services are we providing? What clinics, what mutual aid are we gifting for those that are unable to step back and slow down? It's also the time of death. It's that credible night skies, the night skies of winter. We look at our ancestors who are probably long gone, right? They've been long gone for millions of years, but it's that time of dreaming. It's that dream time. It's the time to allow the dream to dream us. We're not alone in this. This isn't my soul dream. There's something larger dreaming me, and I need to lay things down. We close our school in the winter so we can lay things down. Of course, we have to work and, take care of, moving on. But it's just how do we live seasonally? How do we honor that Gaian movement? And so, this is that time of death. It's giving death to what doesn't serve us, giving death to habits, giving death to activity, constantly going out. You don't have to go to that music or the movie. Winter is the time of resting. And going back to Joni's beautiful song, let me see if I can remember. It's still the Woodstock song. Find the cost of freedom, right? Because death is freedom, and we give death to things and we're free of that habit. Find the cost of freedom buried in the ground. Mother Earth will swallow you. Lay your body down. And that's that laying down. That's that resting. And that's the energetics. That are the patterns. That's the amount of incredible love that we're given in just walking out the door, just observing all of the changes and the instructions. And this is how we live. This is what we do. This is how we try to support our community. And so in the final energetic, I want to talk about community and the herbal community and who we are. And finally, we really haven't begun the conversation of appropriation and inclusivity and working with gender and working with all the language and the invitation of all forms of people. How do we serve them? How do we hold them? We're just stepping in. And yet, you know, these conversations, they're irritants. And it's like we have our beloved herbs, we have irritating diaphoretics and irritating expectorants. And that's what juniper berry does. It's irritating. It goes into the kidney with its volatile oil, and it kind of rustles up the kidney glomerular filter, the tissues, and it activates it, and it kind of comes on live. And that's what our social justice, you know, it's irritating. People are like, oh God, are they talking about this again? Well, really? Have you stopped talking about it? You know, if it's an irritant, go deep and really claim that part of, well, that is my racism. That is my supremacy. That's my needing perfection. That's a tenet of white supremacy. So many invisible tenets that we don't even know that we're supporting a structure whose time it is to give death to really let that one go. We can only do it by really activating and allowing those irritants to bring us change. And then the last is you sitting with your clients, how we hold them. You know, I have a cardiologist who is an absolute Buddha who just holds sacred space. So we are not the only professionals, obviously, but herbalists, people dig herbalists because we're friendly and we spend time and we hold them. And one of the most beautiful techniques I love teaching my students is wide angle vision. So look it up on YouTube, and it's a way of, dropping into parasympathetic. And this is what trackers and people who live in the woods, I taught this up in at a women's conference in New England in an intensive, and Deb Sewell, the beautiful gardener at Avena, she came up afterward and she said, oh my goodness, that was so beautiful. That's how I live, because she's a pollinator, right? Her whole being, it's her garden. She's focused on that herb. So what wide angle vision does is it allows us to see a periphery and then even sense behind us, but it allows us to come into focus. So as I'm sitting there holding my client and really feeling different energies, and I'm smelling and I'm seeing and I'm observing and I'm just gathering information, I'm also able to focus and listen to blood work and listen to those keywords, right? That clue us into certain plants. Sometimes I have plants walk in with clients, and that's always a very special day. And sometimes they'll make no sense, but of course they go into the formula. So a way to sit and hold, but the thing is, wide angle vision is heart. You know, we can say get into heart space, but what does that mean? And for me, wide angle vision, that's dropping into heart space. I can hold them. And I don't have that charge, or I don't have a different intellectual refrain or response. It's a very different way. So I just want to offer one more honoring of an ancestor that has left this year. And thank you for staying, if you stayed, or maybe this will be parsed out in fractal form. But this is our beautiful Thich Nhat Hanh. You know, he's written so many incredible books. And so this book is a love letter to the earth by our great teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh. Dear Mother Earth, you were born from the dust of distant supernovas and ancient stars. Your manifestation is but a continuation. And when you cease to exist in this current form, you too will continue in another. Your true nature is the ultimate dimension of reality, the nature of no coming and no going, no birth and no death. This is also our true nature. If we're able to touch this, we can experience the peace and freedom of non-fear. And so as herbalists, we have this incredible place. What's the seed? You know, we're going to come and go. Our species is going to come and go, but energy is never destroyed. It's just transformed. So being mindful of how we love these plants and how our love possibly will have that seed of that plant to continue forward. So thank you so very much. And thank you, AHG, for allowing me to share this with even a wider audience. Thank you.